As we get started today, this car has been professionally evacuated in the video. I took it to a local shop and they did it for $45, took about 2 hours. Just be aware that R-134a can pose toxic fumes when they're heated or burned, so that can be an inhalation hazard. And as you're working with it to recharge the system, when it's coming out of the can, it's very cold and you can get freeze burns on your hands. So always wear your protective equipment, especially eyewear, and I highly recommend that you get it done professionally so that it's properly disposed of. This video ends up being about 20-25 minutes long for all the different steps, so I'm going to do the servicing of the AC in a separate video. So the gauges there at the top, the rotary vacuum pump, some of that stuff is going to be used in a second standalone video.
Going to remove the air manifold, air tube, and the air box so that we can get access to the power steering and the air conditioner. I'm going to release this clamp here. Going to pull the friction setting off this hose right here. I'm going to leave this connected. Over here, they're in the front and the back. So the front left corner and the back center are two 12mm bolts. One's a bolt in the back, one's a nut that connects to a anchor point in the front, and then there's a 10mm bolt here that holds this duct, this little intake manifold. So one Phillips screwdriver, going to loosen up to where it freely moves without taking the clamp off, using a 12mm. Going to break it free, then using the extension like a screwdriver handle, I'm going to pull the bolt here, 12mm bolt. In the front, it's a nut. So as I unscrew it, once it gets loose, I'm going to reach down with my finger and sort of hold it. So that it comes off. Don't want to drop it back down in the engine. Going to put my 10mm socket on. Release this 10mm bolt. Then I'm going to release this air manifold or tube here. Just work it back and forth. Pull the hose off. Lift the air intake up. Okay, I took the clip off, the electrical connector, the same thing on the back side. Then I'm going to use a needle nose pliers. They've got these little white retaining pins here. You can squeeze them together so that you can slide them out. Give yourself a little more working room without damaging them. Put it in, squeeze it together, clip comes right out. That way you'll be able to put them back in when you're done. So this assembly can be, or this wire assembly can be moved up. We'll put the air box up out of the way. So I'm going to take the fan out. There's a power clip here. It's just got the little push in and pull it up. It's got two of those little, I don't know what they call them, retaining devices here where you just squeeze them together. Going to take them, squeeze them so that when I put them back together they're still intact. Tuck that out of the way. There are two 10mm bolts right here. Rotate it back and lift it up. You have to have a pivot point for the pump assembly, and you'll notice that there's a gap here in this pulley. There's two gaps. Inside of one of those is a 14mm pivot bolt. That alignment, I don't know of any way to do it except when I stopped the car, I came out and I checked and it wasn't aligned, and I restarted the car and I shut it off again and it was. I don't know if there's a trick of the trade, but this belt is tight and I can't turn it with my hands, so that was the only thing I could think to do, is restart the car until we could align the bolt. I don't know if you can see back here, but on the back side there's a 14mm bolt back here as well that we're going to remove. So once you break it, it may start to turn freely. If you reach back, and I can undo with my fingers. Remember, the engine is cold here. I let it cool off. And the first thing we're going to do is remove the belt and the power steering pump. So I broke that 14mm bolt loose there. These are 12mm bolts. Going to release. This is a lock bolt here, the one on the front face. Release it first. This assembly here will loosen up, and I can adjust the tension on this. You can see that this is now slack, and I can release my finger. And then there's also a 14mm bolt on the face of this right here. There's the one through the pulley wheel, come out on the outside. There's one right in front that's a part of this assembly. You can see, relatively speaking, where it is based on where I've got the wrench. I'm going to take all four of these, and the idea is to loosen this up. I'm going to take the back, being real careful not to drop the bolt, hopefully. The nut, I guess. There's the 14mm nut on the back side of the pivot pin that goes with this pulley. And of course it's not exactly aligned. I'm going to thunk it, right? Once I loosen this 14, this 14, this 12, and this 12, the pump assembly can be moved down. The belt, you can get some slack on the belt. Pull the belt off.
The video doesn't show it, but you will need to remove the 14mm bolt that holds the slacker assembly on before removing the pivot bolt and removing the power steering.
This next part is pretty unnerving, at least it is to me. You can see the 14mm pivot bolt right here slides. That's the pivot point. Well, if you look right here, you can see there's a rusted, looks like a solid piece rusted sleeve where the bolt is coming through. This is the main bracket that holds the assembly on. According to some pictures I got, this is a sleeve that moves back and forth, and as the bolt, when you put the 14mm nut on the back side and you tighten it down, that bolt pulls this sleeve forward up against the pump. So it's not, in my case, it's a 14-year-old car, so there's a lot of rust on this particular bolt and on this particular sleeve. So when I pull the pin out and I try and move this pump, well, it pivots, but it doesn't come out because that sleeve is pushed up really tight. So I'm going to rotate this down a little bit. I'm going to use a little pry bar and gently pry it out of the pivot point. You can see it comes out. You probably can't do it with just your own finger pressure or hand pressure. Now the problem is getting that sucker back in, so I'm going to need to tap this back, use a little percussion maintenance, and tap that sleeve back just a tiny bit in order to be able to put the pump back in. Alright, so you can see I've got the breaker bar up against that sleeve. And I'm just going to tap it a few times, and I don't know if you can see the silver area, but that sleeve has moved aft a little bit, so that now when I gently put this back in, the assembly, I can very easily move this pump around. Now be careful as you take the pump off. You got these wires and hoses, so you don't want to damage them as you just move it generally out of the way. This wire assembly, which is connected to the power steering here, I'm going to come here, right here, use my needle nose pliers and slide this clamp out and loosen that wire assembly just a little bit more. And then gently, I'm going to move the pump around as I need to get access to the different points. Alright, looking down from the top, you can see I have the power steering pump pulled out of the way. Here's the air conditioner's compressor. That wire, when we go back to, pre-flighting the assembly, or the new pump, we saw that there was a wire that came off. You can see it's zip tied up to a point right here. I'm not sure, this is an accumulator or something. And you got to push down on the little lever lock and pull that off. And then I'm going to cut these zip ties and release that wire. Okay, looking at it from the side here, I'm going to first take off using a 10mm wrench here, I'm going to take that top manifold off. This AC has already been evacuated by a professional. I did not want to figure that out for myself, so for $45 I took it in and had it done. I'm going to release the tension on the manifold. Put my finger down here and catch this bolt as it comes out. I don't want to lose it. Okay, having removed the top manifold and putting the end in I put a latex glove over it to keep it from getting contaminated. I'm going to come down to this side manifold, and right here there's a 10mm bolt right here. Those things are held in place with an O-ring, so when you disconnect that first one, you should get a little bit of venting. And they do require a little bit of work. You got to use a little bit of elbow grease to get them out. I'm sorry I'm in the way, but there's only so much you can see here. Got it on there. There's a hose in the way. It's almost out. Okay, I can pull it out here. kind of corroded looking. The other one wasn't quite as corroded. I'm going to rotate back and forth gently because there's a O-ring in there. And then push it off to the side and put some type of cover on it so that it doesn't ingest anything inside of the system. Here you can see there's a 12 millimeter bolt here, right down here, another one right here, which the hose might be in the way, and another one down on the front. Now you can barely see right here where that front one is. Look at the replacement and get an orientation. I'm going to use a little cheater bar here. Now I can move my power steering a little bit, get the hose so I can get a little more travel. Be careful not to move it too much to disrupt the electrical wiring going to it. At some point, I'll take the wrench out, use the socket. Still don't have quite all the way loose. Alright, I won't lie to you, it took about 10 minutes. You know, the old time turns all the time passes on all those home do-it-yourself shows. There are these 4 bolts. I saved this top aft one for last. As I release it, you can be careful, let it sort of gently rest there momentarily, get the last bolt out. And I don't want to let this thing come out and tilt because there's oil in it. So I'm going to bring it carefully. I'm going to move my power steering pump here. Try and bring it up. Be careful not to bang up your radiator since we got the fan out of the way. Pull the old one out. Set it right out in front. Alright, this thing has oil in it. Gotta turn the crank, I think. I don't know that for a fact, but it seems like somebody told me that.
After draining my AC pump, I'm going to put the same amount of new PAG oil into a cup and then pour it into the side port of the replacement AC. Reference your manual if you get a new one for the proper amount of oil, and you actually pour it right in the side port where the manifold is, and then keep the pump upright so it doesn't drain out.
Okay, I'm going to reinstall this. I'm going to be lifting the power steering up, putting the air conditioner back in, compressor back in, putting those 4 bolts in, and then I'll pick up at that point again. Okay, once I get this reinstalled, I want to be real careful. First off, I'm going to put the top 2 in just because they're the easiest to get at, but I'm not going to tighten them too tight because trying to get the bottom ones in, it's hard to get them aligned, so you may have to jiggle it a little bit. So put these in about finger tight, maybe back it off a couple of cranks where it's just got a little bit of play in it, then come in and work the bottom 2 bolts. And I'm going to caution you again that be careful about your radiator. If you took the fan off, which probably you did in order to get the 14 millimeter pivot bolt for the power steering. I'm pretty sure I've dinged a couple of these little fins. I don't think it's fatal to the radiator, nothing's leaking or anything, but it will affect its efficiency, especially in the hotter climates. Okay, I've snugged up the bottom two. Gonna snug up these on the top. I don't know if there's any torque settings. I know that they were hard to get off, so I'm gonna make sure they're pretty snug. Alright, and now I'm gonna put the manifold on the top and the bottom, and that'll complete the reinstallation of the AC, and also run the wire back over to the clip. So that will complete the reinstallation. I'm going to secure the wire here with zip ties to this power steering hose just like it was before, and then we'll come back and put the power steering back in place. Remember, I tapped the sleeve back a little bit to make it so where I could put the power steering back in. Oh, by the way, here's the manifold. The other manifold is snug. Wires reconnected. Now I'm going to align the power steering. Just hold it in place until I get the pivot bolt to slide through. Okay, I snugged up the bolt here until this sleeve. You can see, you might be able to see a little bit of a shining where the rust has been pushed out of the way. That sleeve is now snug here. And then I backed it off a little bit so that it would still rotate. Then I loosened up the slacker assembly here. And I'm going to adjust it so that I can put that front 14 millimeter bolt here to anchor the slacker assembly. I have another video out there that shows you how to do the belts. If you look under Tool Time Tabor, you'll see there's a Miata alternator belt, and it talks about all of these 4 bolts and how to do them. Okay, I put the belt on. I tightened down the 14 millimeter pivot bolt, installed the slacker assembly 14 millimeter bolt, and adjusted the 2 12 millimeter bolts, looking so that I get about a 1/4 inch deflection with moderate pressure about halfway down the belt. I don't know the exact tension. And now that this is back in place, I'm going to tighten the hose here and the crossover. I don't know what this thing here, crossover air manifold. I'm going to put that hose, friction hose back in. Plug in the theoretically idiot-proof plugs. Oops, that's a good thing they're idiot-proof. Gray one goes on this side, the black one comes around to this side. You can see it's not screwed in yet, so it's floating around. Plug in those little retainers right there, there, and there. Put in my 3 bolts.
Alright, this completes the removal and reinstallation of the AC compressor. As we go forward, I'm going to put out a video to actually reservice this particular car from 0 PSI inside the system. There are some really good videos out there. Two of the better sets, Eric the Car Guy really goes into the proper use of the gauges and the vacuum pump, and the AC AutoZone has a good one, especially in the diagnostics, that talks in detail about the pressure gauges and how to use them and how to interpret them. So good luck and see you next time.